This is a glass of water. It contains 100 gamma of LSD 25, 1/10 of a milligram. Let us observe the effect some 3 hours later.
I can see everything in color. And the dimensions and all the prisms and the rays and everything coming down through you and moving.
What does this all mean to you?
I've never seen such infinite beauty in my life.
There was great hope in the early 50s that LSD was going to revolutionize psychiatry. And in some sense, that hope was not misplaced.
In the 1960s, drugs like LSD had moved out of mainstream medicine into recreational use. I think the powers that be to some extent felt that things were getting out of control, so that in the mid-60s there was a move to try and put the lid back in the bottle, to get the genie back into the bottle, to try and restore social control that appeared to be on the verge of breaking down.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in mass marches, rallies, and demonstrations.
If we're going to be able to prosecute wars in the future, we can't have too many people taking drugs like LSD.
When they would take it, they go, wait a minute, why am I supposed to go fight in Vietnam? Exactly, explain to me, what am I doing over there? You're wanting me to kill these other people, but they're just like me, I'm killing a part of me. And you do see out of the box with LSD. You do see past culturally imposed values.
You know, the whole goal was to sort of crack open the mind, break away from the constraints of a culture that we felt was inhibiting the human potential, that we might embrace a new realm of possibilities.
The upshot, though, was quite extraordinary in that in order to ban a drug, you had to paint it as having extreme dangers linked to it. And the biggest and most convenient danger to use was the idea that you would get hooked. In actual fact, you cannot become physically dependent or get addicted to a drug like LSD.
To try to deal with something like this in a straightforward scientific manner is really difficult, because you're really dealing with irrational, fear-based reactions that have nothing to do with what the drugs have done in the past and what they can do in the future.
It's been 40 years, 50 years, essentially, since all clinical work on psychedelics was shut down.
Despite the restrictions on research into LSD, its dramatic effects on the brain had put scientists on the trail of a new and intriguing neurotransmitter called serotonin.
Serotonin is referred to as a neurotransmitter system. It's also referred to as a neuromodulatory system because it modulates or regulates not only a lot of different kinds of processes in the brain, but it also regulates the activities of other neurotransmitter systems. Psychedelics have a similar kind of role in the brain, although sometimes what they're doing is releasing the control that serotonin has over certain areas of the brain.
So everything that's coming in through your senses, except for smell, comes in the brain and goes through an area called the thalamus, which is kind of like a gateway. The thalamus decides what gets sent to the cortex. And the cortex, these executive areas, is what puts together your whole sort of gestalt. What is your reality?
Now, these two parts of the brain, the lower part of the brain that regulates the flow of information and the middle parts of the brain that provide the emotional interpretation of the information, are linked through these serotonin circuits. And so one of the things that these psychedelics do is that they stimulate this serotonergic circuitry that enhances the connections between the emotional brain and this lower behavioral and informational brain. So this is why I talk about these psychedelics as really being better characterized as psychointegrators. They function much like serotonin in integrating the activities at the different levels of the brain, but they do so in a way that changes the serotonin's sort of repressive control mechanisms, regulating us from having too much information to saying, you get it all. And this is part of the overwhelming experiences that people have, but it's also why we get these intense insights, these intuitive understandings, the sense that everything is now all connected together, because the brain really is being connected together by the way these substances interface with the serotonin system.
What really got researchers interested in serotonin and its functions was the fact that LSD resembled serotonin chemically. Not only that, but LSD affected all of these various functions of serotonin and was really used as a molecular tool to understand what serotonin was doing.
If you had a psychiatric disorder, say you were schizophrenic in the 1940s, the general consensus then was, or the belief was then, that you were schizophrenic because your mother had failed in some way. You had not had a nurturing mother, she had not breastfed you. There was no concept that what happened in your behavior was in any way related to brain neurochemistry.
Among these drugs, the hallucinogens, are included mescaline, a chemical taken from the peyote cactus, psilocybin, extracted from a variety of Mexican mushroom, DMT, synthesized from the compound tryptamine, and of course, LSD-25.
Albert Hofmann discovered LSD in 1943. Sandoz began to send it out to psychologists and psychiatrists, say, here's something that produces a state like mental illness. You can use it to learn about it, possibly use it as a tool to study mental illness. So serotonin, which principally occurs in the gut, was isolated and identified in about 1948, about 5 years later.
LSD was, showed tremendous promise and continued to show promise as a tool in neuroscience, as a tool for understanding brain functions.
William James, the famous American psychologist, made a distinction between two different kinds of ways behavior change. And he talked about the educational variety of behavior change, where things occur incrementally. We learn things, and that's how we normally think about behavior change. And then he said, there's a different kind of way human behavior changes, and that's an all or none type of change. Psychologists have used various terms to describe conversion experiences or quantum change or epiphanies, to kind of grab the idea that the human organism is capable of having a profound shift of perceptual awareness.
Often in a psychedelic session, there's a sense that there is a process unfolding that's just incredibly well crafted, incredibly wise, and it's not coming from the person who has ingested the substance or the guide. It's coming from the depths of the unconscious itself.
People recognize very often the pain that they've been running away from all their lives, but they also recognize that central and indestructible part of themselves that they've never seen before, at least that they've lost touch with.
And ultimately, that entails feeling drawn into this transcendental, mystical realm of the self, beyond the individual historical life, and beyond that to the profound unitive states that the Hindu would call samadhi, or the Christian might call the beatific vision, a Sufi would call fana, the profound awareness at the very core of the mystery of what we are.
I'm reminded of a slogan or two I saw some students carrying once. One said, all wars are civil wars because all men are brothers. Right. And another one said, there is no they.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the components of the LSD experience. The understanding that there is no they. There's no other. It is all one.